In this Blender tutorial, I'll show you how to create rigged tank treads in Blender. So in this video, I'll be showing you how to model these treads and these wheels, and then I'll show you how to rig the treads so that you can move this empty object in the center, and that is going to rotate the treads and the wheels, and you'll also be able to rotate the treads around and the wheels will move correctly, and you can also rotate the treads on the Z-axis and rotate them back and forth, and you can see the wheels and treads will move correctly. Now the following video is a short clip from my Blender course, my Sci-Fi Construction Robot. And that is an 11-part tutorial series, and it's all step by step in real time, and I'll show you how to create this Sci-Fi Construction Robot, and we even rig and animate the robot. So if you'd like to learn more about the course, then you can check out the product trailer video with the link in the description, and you can also check out the product pages with the links in the description. And when you purchase the course, as well as getting all of the 11 video tutorials, you'll also get the finished project files like the robot 3D model and the finished animation and the sound effects and everything that we use in the tutorial. So I hope you enjoy this free clip from the course. So I'm just going to start by selecting everything, and I'll just delete everything. So I'll now go to the add menu, let's go here to mesh, and we're going to add a new cube. So I'm now going to scale the cube down by 0.1, so I'll type in 0.1 and enter, because I just want to make it a bit smaller, because the default objects in Blender are pretty large. So I now want to press Ctrl A, and I just want to apply that scale. So this is now the object's new default size, and let's hit the tab key to go into edit mode. So in edit mode, I'm going to scale this object, and I'll scale it on the Z-axis, and I'll scale it by 0.2 so that it is even thinner, and then I'm also going to scale it on the y-axis by 0.5 so it's a little bit smaller that way, and then I want to scale it on the x-axis by a 2.8 so it is a bit longer, and that is going to be the first tread, and then we'll be adding an array modifier to add more treads. So let's now hit the tab key to go back into object mode. I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to go here to curve, and we're going to create a curve, and then we're going to make the treads follow that curve. So I'm just going to add the Bezier curve, and after I add it, I'm going to rotate it on the Z-axis by 90 degrees. Just hit enter to rotate that around. And then I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to select this curve handle right here, and I want to rotate it flat. So I'll select that handle, and I'll rotate it on the Z-axis. I'll type in 45, and then I need to hit negative, and then hit enter, so now you can see that it is straight. So I'll now hit the 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I'm just going to select this handle here, and I want to extrude out the curve, and then I want to shape it. So I'll hit E to extrude, bring this out here, and then I can rotate this over and kind of scale this down a bit. And you can see there are little grids in Blender, and I want to make it about 3 grids long. So I'm going to actually bring this back a little bit. It's going to be about 3 grids, so 2 grids in the center, and then half of this grid and half of this grid. So about that big. E to extrude, bring that there, and then rotate that over, just like that. And then I will select this handle here and extrude it again. We can click with our middle mouse wheel and bring that over there. So you can see there is 1 grid, then here's the other grid, and then we're just going to have it be half of this grid. So I'll extrude it to about there, rotate that over by 90 degrees, and then if I select both of these handles, I can press the F key to fill that, and I can also scale these handles down because they're a bit too big. So now that I've modeled the main shape of this, I do want to scale it down a bit so it's a bit smaller, so I'll select everything in edit mode, I'll hit S to scale, and I'll just type in like 0.7 and hit enter, and then I can just bring it down there on the Z-axis and just stick it like that. Alright, so I'll hit the tab key to go back to object mode, and I now want to add some modifiers to this tread piece. So let's click over here to the modifiers panel, and I'll click on add modifier. We can go to the search here, and I'm just going to search for array. We'll choose the array modifier, and then on the array settings, I'm going to turn the factor X to 0. I want to have it be arraying on the Y. So here on the Y, I can turn it to 1, and then I do want a tiny little gap here. So for now, I'll turn the Y to like a 1.01, or actually maybe like a 1.1. So there's just a tiny little gap there between the arrayed objects. And then I can turn up the count, and I'll just turn it up to like maybe a 50 for now. So there's 50 of them. So now I want to add the curve modifier so that this object wraps around the curve. So I'll click on add modifier. Let's add the curve modifier. And then if I click on the eyedropper here, I can just click on the Bezier curve. So now you can see it's wrapping around the curve. So now I also want to add a bevel to bevel out the object here and bevel out that cube. So I'll go to the add menu, and let's just search for a bevel, and we'll choose the bevel modifier. I can scroll down here, and then I'm going to turn these segments up to like a 3, and then I will hold down the shift key, and I'm going to click and drag on this amount here, and I'm going to make it very, very small. And specifically, I'm going to go with a 0.008. I think that is a good size there. And then I'm going to use the object context menu and shade the object smooth. Now I want to make sure that the treads aren't overlapping, so if I go up here to the array, I can turn this down. You can see that right over here, it is overlapping. If I turn the array count down, it's overlapping. So what I want to actually do is change this relative offset because I think there's a little bit too big of a gap and I want them to be touching each other. Maybe I'll even go with a 1.02, and then you can see it is overlapping a bit. So this count here, let's turn it down to 49, and now you can see there's just a little bit of a space there. So this factor y, let's just turn that up a tiny bit more. All right, so that's pretty good. So for me, a 1.026 works well, and then the count at 49, and now it is seamless, and the spacing in between each one of those treads are even. Now if you go into wireframe view and then select the curve here, I can go back to solid view, and if I move this by hitting G to grab and then move it on the y-axis, you can see now the treads are actually going to rotate when the curve is moving. All right, so I'm now going to be creating the wheel object. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go to mesh, and we can add a circle for the wheel, and I can rotate the circle on the y-axis by 90 degrees. And then I just want to move it over here so that it's on the side of the tread. So I'll now go into edit mode, and I want to scale this way down, and then hit the 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and let's go back to object mode, and I'm going to bring this object up, and I'll bring it up on the z-axis and kind of place it there in the center, just like that, and then I can go back into edit mode, and I'm going to scale the entire vertices down in edit mode, just like that, and then go back to object mode and bring it down a little bit, so it's right there in the center, and it's just the right size. And then we'll go into edit mode again, and I'll press the F key just to fill a face there. And then I will extrude it out by hitting the E key, so E to extrude, and we're going to bring it all the way over there, right to the end. Then I can hit the I key, that is going to inset the face, and I'll make it much smaller, and I'll hit the E key again to extrude. All right, let's go back to object mode, and I want to add a bevel to this object, so I'll click on add modifier. We can search for the bevel modifier, just add that bevel, and the segments, I'm going to turn this up to 3, and then also let's turn the amount down. So again, I will hold down the shift key, and then I'll drag this amount, and I'll make that much smaller. And then I'll use the object context menu and just shade that smooth. All right, let's go back into edit mode, and I want to add some more details here on the front. So I'll hit the I key just to inset that face there, and I'll bring that in. Then I can hit the E key, and we'll extrude that back there. Then I can hit the I key again, we'll make that much smaller, kind of like that. And I can hit the E key and just extrude that out. And then what I also want to do is add some circles here. So what I'll do is hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that loop there, so we can kind of select that circle. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to bring it over on the X-axis, and we'll scale it way down. Let's hit 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I can bring it up on the Z-axis, and I can scale the whole thing up a little bit, kind of like that. And I can bring it back on the X-axis and just stick it right in there so it comes out a little bit. All right, press 1 on the numpad, actually 3 on the numpad to go to front view. I can press Shift D to duplicate, and let's bring it down on the Z-axis like that. And then I want to have more of them all the way around. So what I can do is just hover my mouse over this circle and press the L key to select the linked vertices. And then I can press Shift D to duplicate. And then right after I duplicate it, I can hit R to rotate, and I'll type in 90 and then enter. And then I'll press the L key with my mouse hovered over this, and the L key with my mouse hovered over that circle. I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and then R to rotate. This time I'll just type 45 and then enter. So now you can see we have all those little circles there. That adds some cool details. So I can hit Tab to go back to object mode. Now in the previous part, we did rotate this object, and I want to apply the rotation so that this is the object's new default rotation. So I'll just press Control A, and we're just going to apply the rotation, and actually we might as well also press Control A and just apply the scale to make sure that the scale and rotation is applied. But these objects here, we want to keep them how they are. We don't want to apply those, because if I press Control A and apply the rotation and scale, you can see they get messed up. So I'll press Control Z to undo that. So if we go to wireframe, I can select the curve. And if I rotate the curve on the Z-axis, you can see that the treads are being deformed. So I'm going to show you how to fix that now. So I'll go back to solid view. So what we want to do is make the treads follow the rotation of the curve. So we're going to select the treads, and then we're going to click over here to go to the constraint properties. Let's click on add object constraint, and I'm going to add the child of. And then the target here, you can click here and you can choose the Bezier curve, or you can also click on it here. But right right now it's easier just to click on it here in the drop down. Now if I hold down the Z button and go to wireframe and then just select the curve here, if I move the curve on the y-axis, you can see that the child of constraint has kind of messed up the rigging, and so the treads now aren't rotating. So if I click on the treads, we want to disable the location y. So click on that, so it'll be a child of the curve and it'll move with the location, rotation, and scale. These are all checked, but we just want to turn off the y. So now if I select the curve there and move it over on the y-axis, you can see now the treads are rotating correctly. Now I want to add another object which is going to control the treads, because it's pretty annoying to have to go into wireframe and kind of select that object there. It's kind of hard to select and you can't really see it. So I will press Shift C, and Shift C will make sure that the 3D cursor is in the center there. I can now go to the add menu and we're just going to add an empty object. So I'm going to choose an empty plane axis. Now I'm going to hit G to grab, and I'm going to move this over on the x-axis and just stick it here. And this empty here is going to be in between the two treads. So now what I can do is go into wireframe and I can just select the curve, and then I can hold down the Shift key and select the empty last. I'll now press Control P and I can set parent to object, keep transform. So if I go back to solid view, now I can just select the empty and I can move it, and you can see the treads will move with it. So that is great. Now you can see if I double tap the R key to enable the trackball rotation, you can see there's still some issues with the rigging. You can see that the curve is being all messed up and warped. So what I'm going to do is select the treads here, and we need to add some more constraints to the treads. So to fix this, I'm going to click on add object constraint, and we are adding this to the treads object. So add object constraint, and we're going to add the pivot. We're going to add the pivot constraint right there. Now, if we choose the target, we want to choose the Bezier curve because we want it to pivot with that curve. Now this rotation range, we want to click on this and we're going to make it -Z. So now if I select this object here and double tap the R key, you can see it is a bit more fixed, so that is working well, but you can see when I rotate it in certain directions, it's still messed up, so we need to fix this one more time. So I'll click on the treads object again, and let's click on add object constraint, and we're going to add another pivot, and then this one for the target, again, we're just going to choose the Bezier curve. Now for this one, on the rotation range, instead of it being -Z, we want to change this one to the +Z. So this first pivot will fix the rotation on the -Z, but then the second one here will fix the rotation on the positive. So that way it can rotate backwards and forwards, and it'll fix the -Z and the +Z. And if I double tap the R key and kind of rotate this around, you can see it is fully fixed. But I can still move this back and forth, and the tread is rotating correctly. So now I want to create some more treads on the other side. So I will hold down the Z button and go to wireframe. So I'm going to select the tread, then I'll hold down the Shift key and select the curve. So I'll now press Shift D to duplicate, and then if I bring it over on the x-axis, you can see it's kind of being messed up because there's kind of like an offset. So I'll just hit the Escape key to bring it back where it is. Now I can just select one of those curves there, and I can hit G to grab and move it over on the Z-axis, and you can see that tread is being moved along with that curve. And that is because this child of, so the child of is going to make it follow along with the curve. So I can just bring it over here. So I'll press 7 on the numpad to go to top view, and I'm going to bring this to about the center. So I'll hit G to grab, bring it over on the x-axis and make that about the center, so the empty is in the center. So now if I move the empty, you can see the empty is moving the objects, and this circle object here will fix that later, but for now you can see it's moving both of those objects, so it's moving the treads. So if I select the empty, I want to bring the empty back to the center because I want the robot to actually be in the center when it's at its default position. So with the empty selected, you can press Alt-G. Alt-G is going to clear the transforms, so if I go back to solid view, you can see it's now in the center. So I'll now press the 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and I'll hold down the Z button and go to the wireframe. So now I want to bring the treads in a bit so that it's not quite as wide. So I'm going to just select this curve here. I'll hit G to grab and bring it over on the x-axis, and I want to bring it in here and just stick it about there. So I'll select this curve here, G to grab, bring it over on the x-axis, and just stick it right about there. So then I can select the wheel. Let's hit 1 on the numpad. I'll hit G to grab, bring it over on the x-axis, and just stick the wheel where it's supposed to be. So kind of right here in the center of that tread. Let's hold down the Z button and go back to solid view. So let's press Ctrl S again to save the file. Now if I select the empty and move the empty back and forth, you can see the wheel isn't moving along with it. So let's now rig the wheel. So the first thing we can do is we can select the wheel and then hold down the shift key and select the empty. I can now press Control P and I'm gonna set parent to object keep transform. So if I select the empty and move it back and forth, you can see it's moving along with it. Now the problem is that this wheel isn't rotating. It is moving, but it's not actually rotating as it's moving. So we're gonna select the wheel and we're gonna go back here to the constraints. Then we're going to click on Add Object Constraint, and we're going to add this transformation. So this transformation, we can choose a target, which is going to be another object, and then there is a map from setting and a map to setting. So we're going to use the transformation to basically tell it so that when this object moves back and forth, this object is going to rotate. So let's click on the target here, let's click on the eyedropper, and then we can choose the empty object. Now here on the owner, we want to change this to the local space. And that is because the world space is the z-axis up and down, the y-axis back and forth, and the x-axis back and forth this way. But I'm changing the owner to the local space because let's say I rotate the robot like this. Now I want the wheel to rotate over like this. So it's going to rotate at an angle. So it's going to rotate on its local space instead of the global space. So if I hit R to rotate and then hit X to rotate it on the x-axis, this is the global X. If I, however, hit R to rotate and then hit the X key once and then hit the X key twice, it's now rotating on its local space. And so I want it to rotate like that because if I were to rotate it on the global space, you can see it would get deformed and messed up. So I'm just going to select the empty here and press Alt R to clear the rotation. Now the map from is going to be what this object is going to do. So basically when the empty is transformed, the other object is going to move by this transform. So we want to map from location because we want it to affect the location of the empty. So we'll choose location. And then here on the Y min, we want to type in -1. And then here on the Y max, we just want to type in 1. So now we can go to the map 2. And for the map 2, I want it to affect the rotation of the wheel. So from the map 2, instead of it being set to location, we're going to change it to rotation instead. Now right here on the source axis, on the X source axis, we want to actually change this to Y. And then we want to have this object be able to rotate all the way around by 360 degrees. So here on the minimum, I want to turn this all the way up and I can actually drag it all the way up and you can see 180 is the max. And then the maximum, I can drag this all the way back and I want to turn it to -180. So these are the two maximum values. So just to recap, we're basically saying that when the empty is moving on the Y axis, that's going to make the wheel rotate on the x-axis. So if I select the empty, I can hit G to grab and I can bring it over on the y-axis and you can see now that is rotating correctly. Now there is a problem. If I hit G to grab and bring it over on the y-axis, you can see once it's rotated by 180 degrees, it's going to stop. And so to fix this, I'll hit the escape key. What we need to do is select the wheel and we can click on this extrapolate button. So this way it's kind of going to loop it. So if I now select the empty and hit G to grab and then bring this over on the y-axis, you can see it's just going to continue to rotate no matter how far I bring it. So I'll hit the escape key to bring that back. Now, if for some reason I wanted to change the rotation speed, if I select the wheel, I could change the minimum and the maximum values. So if I turn the minimum like way down, now if I select the empty and move it, you can see the wheel is moving, but it kind of looks like it's skidding or sliding because it's not moving at the right speed. So if I click on the wheel, I want to turn this back to 180. So now if I select the empty, you can see that's moving at the correct speed. You can see if you compare it to the treads there, it looks like it's moving correctly. Now there is another problem, and that is if I rotate the empty on the z-axis, you can see again it looks like it's skidding or sliding because I want it to actually rotate back and forth with the treads. So to fix this, we are going to use a driver. So I'm going to press the N key to open up the side panel here, and I'm going to click up here on item, and then we're just going to select the wheel. Now we want to add the driver to the rotation X here on the wheel. So I'm going to right click, and then we're going to click on Add Driver. So this is going to bring up a little panel, and if you drag your mouse out of the driver setting, you can see it goes away, but there is a purple area here, and that is telling it that we have a driver on that property. So if you need to bring it back, just right click, and then click on Edit Driver, and then if you just drag away, it'll go away. So right click and then click on Edit Driver. So now in the object here, we want to click on this here, click on the eyedropper, and we want to choose the empty object. So then again, let's right click and click on edit driver. So you can now see on the object, it is set to empty. Now here on the type, right now it's set to X location, but we want the wheel to be rotated on the Z axis. So on the type here, we'll click on X location, and sorry, my screencast keys are in the way, but we're going to change it to the Z rotation. So just find the Z rotation. So basically what the driver is doing, if I click here on edit driver, it's basically saying that when this empty rotates on the Z axis, that is going to affect the rotation of this wheel. And we chose the X rotation, and that is going to be rotating around like that. So now if I select the empty, if I rotate the empty on the Z axis, you can see now it is moving back and forth. Now there is a problem. If I rotate the empty on the Z axis, you can see it's sliding in the opposite direction. And so we want to flip that. So let's select the wheel again. We're going to right click and then we'll click on edit driver. And then we're going to go right down here and we're going to click on show in drivers editor. And so this is going to open up a new window in Blender. And what I'm going to do is just drag this window over here and stick it here. And then I'll do the same thing over here. So I have Blender over here and then I have the driver editor over here. And so we can control how the driver is being affected. So if I hold down the control key and then middle click and drag, I can drag this way down and make it smaller. And you can see there's going to be this line here. Now if I press the N key to close the side panel, I can zoom in here. Now if I go back over to the driver editor, I can hit R to rotate and I can rotate that rotation value. And so you can see by rotating it, it's going to switch the rotation that it's going to actually rotate using that driver. So I'm just going to rotate it over here and just kind of stick it about there. So now if I select the empty and rotate the empty again, you can see now it's rotating in the correct direction because first it was rotated over this way, but we basically want to mirror it so that it is opposite, so we're going to rotate it over here. Now if I rotate the empty on the Z axis, it kind of looks like it's sliding a little bit, so I'll just hit the escape key to go back and I'm going to select the wheel. So I can now just rotate this and I'm going to rotate that driver property, and then this way if I select the empty and rotate it again, you can see it's moving a bit faster. And if I were to rotate this like way over, rotate it way over, now if I select the empty and rotate it, it's rotating very fast, so that doesn't look right. So basically you're just going to have to rotate this angle to an angle that you think looks good. And for me, this angle is going to work pretty well. So if I now select the empty and rotate it on the Z axis, you can see that looks just about correct. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is just click on the X button here to close this driver setting. And I'll just make Blender full screen again. Alright, so now what I want to do is duplicate all the wheels. Let's just press Ctrl S to save. So I'm going to select the wheel here, and I'll press 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate, and I can bring the wheel over on the Y axis and just stick it about there, and then Shift D to duplicate and bring it over on the Y axis and bring it back to about there. And then because we duplicated these after we added those drivers and those other settings, if I select the empty and rotate it on the Z axis, you can see it's going to have the same effect. So now I want to duplicate them and move them over to the other side. So I'm going to select the 3 wheels in object mode. I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate and I'll bring it over on the X axis. Then I can hit the Tab key to go into edit mode and I'll select everything and I'll hit S to scale. And I'm going to scale all of the mesh on the X axis, and then I'll type in -1 and then enter. So we're basically inverting it or flipping the mesh. And then because we did that, we need to recalculate the normals. So just press Shift N to recalculate the normals. So I can now bring it over a little bit and I'll hit Tab to go back to object mode, and I can hit G to grab, and I can bring the entire thing over on the X axis and just stick it right there in about the center. So now if I select the empty, I can rotate it and you can see it is following along. However, there's a problem, and that is that it looks like it's sliding again because it is rotating in the opposite direction. So to fix this, we need to change the rotation oiler that we added on the driver, and we need to make it rotate in the opposite direction. So let's select this object here. I'll press the N key to open up the side panel, and I can right click here on the rotation X and click on edit driver. Then I can go right down here and I can click on show in driver editor. This will again bring up the driver editor, and I'll just hold down the control key and click and drag with my middle mouse wheel and make that much smaller. And I basically just want to invert this back to how it was. So I'll hit S to scale, then I'll hit X to scale on the X axis. I can type in -1 and then enter. There we go, now it's rotated over. So if I drag this over to my other monitor, I can now just select the empty here, and I can rotate the empty like that, and you can see now that center wheel is looking correct. So let's select this object here, and I'll bring the driver editor back here to my other monitor, and I can scale this on the X axis, type in -1 and then enter. All right, so I'll drag the driver editor over here. Let's just select the last one, and then I can drag the driver editor back, and again, scale this On the x-axis, type in -1 to invert it and hit enter, and then I can just close the driver editor. So now if I just select the empty here and rotate it, you can see that is rotating correctly. Alright, now one more thing before we finish up this part. Later in the tutorial series, when we do all of the rigging, when the robot has his pose, and when I pose the robot, I want to clear all the transforms and have the robot go back to his default pose. And that's really helpful for when you're doing different animations with the robot. So if I press the A key to select all the objects, I can press Alt-R to clear the rotations, Alt-G to clear the movements, and then Alt-S to clear the scale. But that is a problem because you can see it's resetting everything and messing everything up. So let me just press Ctrl-Z to undo that. So to fix this, I want to lock all the transforms. So I'm going to select this wheel here. Let's press the N key to open up the side panel. And on all of the objects except the empty, I want to lock all these transforms because the drivers and the constraints are going to move the object and the empty will move the object, but all the other objects we can lock the transforms. So let's select the wheel, and then here on the transforms, you can click and drag on these little locks here, and that's going to lock all of them. So if I hit G to grab or R to rotate or S to scale, you can see it's locked. So we're going to select the wheel, click and drag to lock all these, select this wheel, click and drag to lock them, select the tread here, click and drag to lock them, and then if I go into wireframe, I also want to select that curve there, and then we're going to click and drag to lock that, and then if I select the other curve, I want to click and drag to lock that. I can click here on the treads, click and drag to lock all those. Let's go back to solid view, and then I can click on the wheel and lock all that, click on the wheel, lock all of that, and click on this final wheel and lock all that. So if I press the N key now to close the side panel, I can select this empty here, and you can see the empty is still going to move the objects because it's using the drivers and the constraints. So that is still working correctly. However, if I press the A key to select all the objects, I can press Alt-R, Alt-G, and Alt-S, and you can see the objects stay where they are. So that is how you create these rigged treads in Blender. So I hope you found the video helpful, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to check out the full course on how to create the Sci-Fi Construction Robot, then definitely check out the course trailer video and the course product pages with the links in the description. And that's an 11-part tutorial series where I show you step by step in real time how to create this Sci-Fi Construction Robot, and in the tutorial series we rig the entire robot and animate the robot and create this finished robot animation. So definitely check out the robot course with the links in the description. But I hope you found this helpful, and thank you for watching.